Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the data, the direct quotes, and the underlying economic triggers behind a really fascinating claim. It's the idea that a massive, fundamental shift is currently reshaping American politics. Now, just to be clear right up front, we aren't here to take a political side. Not at all. Instead, we're going to neutrally unpack the exact numbers and real-world events the source material uses to build its case, so you can clearly see the architecture of this entire argument for yourself. Okay, so let's get right into it. To really understand the weight of this central claim, we first have to look at the track record of the man who made it, Peter Thiel. You might know the name. He arrived in the US from West Germany back in 1968, and by 1998, he co-founded a little startup you've probably heard of called PayPal. Then, 6 years later, he wrote a $500,000 check for a 10% stake in this brand new website called Facebook. Basically, Thiel has built an entire career on identifying major structural trends a full decade before they ever hit the mainstream. And that brings us to a very specific recent moment. Picture this, a panel discussion in Aspen, Colorado. The room is absolutely packed with powerful establishment political figures. Thiel is sitting right next to Francis Fukuyama. Now, Fukuyama is the famous political scientist who argued that liberal democracy had basically won the ideological war, and he was sitting there making the case that our current system is holding strong. But Thiel? Well, he calmly disagreed, pointing instead to a deep underlying sense of economic stagnation. And then Thiel said something that literally caused this room of powerful figures to gasp out loud. He said, "I think there's going to be a democratic socialist takeover in the Democratic Party." But honestly, the most striking part was his follow-up. Keep in mind, Thiel is a guy who heavily funds Republican campaigns. Yet he told this room of liberals that his own party actually matters less right now. Why? Because if the Democratic Party goes over the edge, he said, quote, "This country is over." He genuinely believes the fate of the entire nation is riding on what happens inside their tent. Section 1. The Catalyst. Economic Stagnation. So, the source video argues this warning wasn't just some irrational outburst. It was actually a precise diagnosis rooted in severe, quantifiable economic stagnation. The underlying soil for this political shift comes down to a massive gap in basic affordability. Think about this for a second. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition for 2025, a full-time worker needs to make $33.63 an hour just to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment. But the average renter? They're only making $23.60 an hour. That is a $10 an hour deficit. I mean, imagine a parent sitting at the kitchen table late at night with a calculator, coming up short every single month. That daily economic reality is the true catalyst here. Section 2. The Symptoms. Electoral Upsets. Because of that, this daily economic frustration has completely stopped being just a mood. It's directly translating into real-world political power. Case in point, on January 1st, Democratic Socialist mayors were sworn in to run New York and Seattle. And they aren't just protest candidates. They are executives controlling actual police departments and massive city budgets. Backing them up is the Democratic Socialists of America, an organization that now boasts over 100,000 members. And their goals are definitely not hidden. We're talking Medicare for all, free college, universal rent control, expanded public housing, and a 32-hour work week. They are banking dozens of wins and endorsed 150 candidates in a single year. To give you an idea of exactly how deep this goes, you just have to look at the June 2026 primaries. We saw massive upsets against deeply entrenched establishment figures. Adriano Espaillat, the sitting chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, lost to a DSA challenger. Dan Goldman, the party's hand-picked institutionalist, lost by over 30 points. And in Colorado, a 15-term incumbent, Diana Degitt, was completely unseated by a socialist challenger, Melik Quiros, on the exact same day Thiel was speaking in Aspen. Section 3. The Establishment Reaction. Now, as you can imagine, when a 15-term incumbent gets thrown out, the traditional political establishment begins to panic. Take veteran Democratic strategist James Carville, for example. The architect of Bill Clinton's 1992 victory looked at these primary results and basically declared a breaking point. He bluntly stated that it's time to use the word schism, saying, quote, "I'm done. I'm not in that political party." When the most loyal attack dog of the modern establishment says he's out, you know a massive shift has unequivocally occurred. And Senator John Fetterman echoed that profound discomfort, highlighting the sheer intensity and panic coming from within his own party's ranks. He used some highly charged language to describe his caucus.
He called it an orgy of socialism and claimed it was drifting into communism. That is intense phrasing from an inside player. All of this internal panic essentially boiled over on June 26th when 13 moderate House Democrats felt so compelled that they launched something called the Promise to America. It was a literal, written loyalty oath specifically stating they are for capitalism, not socialism. The source material argues this is the absolute ultimate proof of the establishment's fear. I mean, think about it. Nobody signs a formal document swearing they believe in capitalism unless they are absolutely terrified that the people standing right next to them do not.
Section 4. The reveal, the underlying poll.
And this brings us right to the climax of the argument. Peter Thiel wasn't acting as some mystical oracle predicting a wild future back in Aspen. He was really just doing what he always does, reading the data on the page before anyone else bothers to turn it. So, what was the exact data point he was looking at? What's the single number sitting underneath this entire story that explains the massive gap between establishment politicians and the voters?
Well, the answer lies in a relatively quiet poll published by Gallup in August of 2025, asking Americans about their economic views. Among Democrats, 66% held a positive view of socialism. Only 42% held a positive view of capitalism. That is a massive 24-point gap. For the first time since Gallup started asking this question back in 2010, less than half of the party had a good word for the economic system the entire country actually runs on.
But here is the absolute kicker. The most crucial point is the specific year this started. This statistical flip didn't just happen during the recent primary season. No, the lines actually crossed a full decade ago. 2016 was the exact year that voters in this demographic first started liking socialism more than capitalism.
So, tying all these threads together, the billionaires' warning, the socialist mayors taking office, the ousted 15-term incumbents, Carville walking away, and politicians literally signing loyalty oaths, none of this is the beginning of a new movement. It is simply the paperwork catching up. The voters quietly made this monumental decision a full decade ago, and the politicians they elected are only just now finding out what they actually agreed to. Like the source says, it wasn't a prediction, it was a receipt. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly fascinating question to ponder. If voters completely changed their underlying economic worldview 10 whole years before the establishment politicians even noticed the grounded move beneath their feet, what else is sitting quietly in the data right now waiting to upend the world in 2036? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the numbers, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.